My parents told me not to come home for Thanksgiving because my sister did not want drama. So I went to a restaurant alone, and the family at the next table invited me to join them. Years later, those strangers are now my legal parents. My biological mother and father only found out the truth at my wedding, when security stopped them from sitting in the front row. Before I tell you how I replaced my toxic relatives with people who actually loved me, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever felt like an outsider in your own home. My name is Sophia, and at 32 years old, I was still chasing the approval of people who saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM. I was 4 hours into the drive from Chicago to Atlanta, my SUV packed to the brim with gifts. In the trunk sat a $300 bottle of Cabernet that my brother-in-law Kyle had mentioned wanting. Beside it was a limited edition gaming console for my nephew. I was humming along to the radio, tapping my perfectly manicured fingers on the steering wheel. I was a successful landscape architect, running my own firm, yet I still felt that desperate childish hope that maybe this holiday would be different. Maybe if I brought enough gifts, if I smiled enough, if I made myself small enough, my family would finally see me. The Bluetooth system in my car rang, cutting off the music. The screen flashed Mom. My heart jumped. I answered with a smile, eager to please. Hey Mom, I am making good time. I should be there by 6. I cannot wait to help you with the turkey. There was silence on the other end. No excitement, no warmth, just a heavy sigh that I knew all too well. Sophia, honey, listen, we need you to turn around. My foot hovered over the brake pedal. The car slowed down in the middle of the highway lane before I corrected myself. What? What do you mean turn around? I am more than halfway there. Look, your sister Jasmine is having a meltdown. My mother Brenda spoke as if she was discussing the weather, not banishing her eldest daughter. Jasmine thinks if you come, you are going to try to make everything about yourself like you always do. She says your energy is too intense. And Kyle? Well, you know how Kyle gets. He just wants a private family Thanksgiving. He does not feel comfortable with outsiders right now. Outsiders. The word hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Mom, I am your daughter. I have been driving for 4 hours. I took days off work. I have gifts for everyone in the back. I know, Brenda said, her voice dripping with that fake sympathy she used when she wanted to manipulate me. It is just easier this way, Sophia. You know how sensitive your sister is. We have to protect her peace. We can do a video call next week. Oh, but Sophia, since you are already halfway here, could you drop the package off at the post office in the next town? I blinked, sure I had misheard. What package? The wine, Sophia. And the game for the kids. Just express mail it. Kyle was really looking forward to that specific vintage you promised. I will Venmo you for the shipping cost. The air in my car suddenly felt very thin. My hands started to tremble. They did not want me. They did not want my company. They did not want my laughter or my stories. They wanted the wine. They wanted the expensive toys. They wanted the status of having a successful daughter to brag about to their church friends. But they did not want the actual human being. Mom, I whispered, my voice breaking. You are uninviting me from Thanksgiving, but you still want the gifts. Do not be dramatic, Sophia. That is exactly why Jasmine did not want you here. You always make everything a tragedy. Just mail the box and go back to your apartment. You're used to being alone anyway. She hung up. I stared at the dashboard. The call ended, but her words were still ringing in my ears. You are used to being alone anyway. I pulled onto the shoulder of the highway, the gravel crunching loudly under my tires. Cars whizzed past me at 70 miles per hour, shaking my vehicle, but I felt frozen. I looked at the beautifully wrapped presents in the back seat. I had spent weeks picking them out. I had worked overtime to afford that wine because I knew Kyle would turn his nose up at anything cheap. I had done everything right. I had followed every rule. And it still was not enough. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. A scream tore out of my throat, raw and guttural. It was the sound of 32 years of trying to buy love finally breaking. I screamed until my throat burned. I screamed for the little girl who was always compared to Jasmine. I screamed for the woman who was just called an outsider by her own mother. I looked in the rearview mirror. Mascara ran down my cheeks. I looked pathetic. But then something shifted. The sadness began to curdle into something hotter, something sharper. Anger. Why was I crying for people who would not even save me a plate of food? Why was I driving 4 hours for a sister who viewed my existence as a threat? I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I looked at the GPS. I could turn around and drive 4 hours back to my empty apartment in Chicago and cry on my couch. That is what the old Sophia would have done. The Sophia who desperately wanted to be good. But that Sophia died the moment her mother asked for the wine, but not her daughter. I typed in a new destination. I searched for the most expensive, highly rated steakhouse in the nearest city. The Hearth, 5 stars, reservations required. I am not mailing anything, I said out loud to the empty car. I put the car back in drive. I was not going home, and I was definitely not sending that wine. Tonight I was going to drink that $300 bottle myself. And as for the gaming console, meant for my ungrateful nephew, I was going to donate it to a shelter where a child would actually appreciate it. I merged back onto the highway. I did not know it yet, but that U-turn was the most important turn of my life. I was driving away from my past and heading straight toward a table where 3 strangers were about to change my destiny forever. The Hearth was the kind of establishment where the lighting was always golden and the air smelled of roasted rosemary and old money. I handed my keys to the valet, smoothing down the silk of my dress. It was a deep emerald green, a color my mother always said made me look too dark, but tonight I wore it like armor. Walking into the restaurant, the warmth of the fireplace hit me instantly, contrasting with the freezing void I felt in my chest. "Table for one," the hostess asked, her smile faltering just a fraction. It was the same look people gave stray dogs in the rain. Pity mixed with confusion. "Yes, just one," I said, keeping my chin high. She led me through the dining room, and it was a minefield of happy families. I saw fathers carving turkeys, mothers wiping sauce off toddlers' faces, and couples holding hands over candlelight. The noise was a symphony of belonging, clinking silverware, laughter, the hum of conversation. I felt like a ghost haunting a feast I was not invited to. I was seated at a small round table near the window, slightly secluded from the main floor. It was the reject table, the spot they put solo diners, so they would not ruin the aesthetic of the family holiday. I ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, and the wine my family had demanded I mail to them. When the waiter poured it, the deep red liquid swirled in the glass, looking ominous. I took a sip. It tasted like oak and berries, but mostly it tasted like freedom. Bitter, lonely freedom. To my right, at a large round table meant for 6, sat an older African-American couple. They were striking. The man had salt and pepper hair cut close to his scalp and wore a suit that fit him so perfectly it had to be bespoke. The woman was elegant, wearing a pearl necklace that glowed against her skin. They were eating quietly, sharing a bottle of wine, but there was an empty chair between them. A place setting was laid out untouched. I tried not to stare, focusing on my appetizer, but their energy was magnetic. They were not on their phones. They were not arguing. They were just present. At one point, the man reached across the table and squeezed the woman's hand, and she smiled at him with such genuine affection, it made my chest ache. That was what love looked like. Not the transactional conditional arrangement I had with my parents, but a steady, quiet current. I felt a shadow fall over my table. I looked up to find the woman standing there. Up close, she was even more beautiful. Her eyes were kind, framed by laugh lines that suggested a life well lived. "Excuse me, dear," she said. Her voice was warm like honey and tea. "I hope I am not disturbing you." "No, not at all," I stammered, putting down my fork. "I am Claire," she said, gesturing back to her table. "That is my husband, Elijah. We noticed you were sitting alone. Our daughter Maya is a resident at Johns Hopkins, and she got pulled into a double shift at the last minute. We have an empty seat and way too much food for 2 people. We would be honored if you would join us." I froze. My first instinct was to refuse. My mother's voice echoed in my head, telling me I was imposing, that I was too much, that people only tolerated me. I opened my mouth to say no, to say I was fine, but then I looked at my lonely steak and the empty chair across from me. I I would not want to intrude, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Nonsense, Claire said, waving her hand dismissively. It is Thanksgiving. No one should be alone, especially not someone dressed so beautifully. Come on. Elijah has been dying to tell his dad jokes to someone new. I stood up, taking my wine glass. As I walked the 10 feet to their table, I felt like I was crossing a border into a different country. Elijah stood up as I approached, buttoning his jacket. He pulled out the empty chair for me. Welcome, he said, his voice deep and resonant. I am Elijah, and you are saving us from a very quiet evening. I am Sophia, I said, sitting down. The waiter immediately appeared, moving my place setting over as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For the next hour, I waited for the other shoe to drop. I waited for them to ask why I was alone. I waited for them to ask where my family was, imply there must be something wrong with me. But they never did. Instead, they asked about me. So Sophia, Elijah asked, cutting a piece of roast duck. What is it that you do when you are not rescuing old couples from boredom? I hesitated. This was usually the part where I braced myself for impact. Whenever I told my parents or their friends about my job, they dismissed it. My father called me a glorified gardener. My sister Jasmine told people I played in the dirt. I own a landscape architecture firm in Chicago, I said, keeping it brief, ready to change the subject. Elijah stopped eating. He put his fork down and looked at me with genuine interest. Landscape architecture. That is fascinating. You deal with urban planning then, zoning laws, drainage systems? I blinked. Yes, actually yes. We specialize in sustainable urban green spaces. We just won a bid to redesign the Riverwalk. Claire leaned in, her eyes lighting up. That is incredible. That requires such a specific balance of engineering and artistry. I have always admired how landscape architects can dictate the flow of human movement through a space just by placing a tree or a path. It is psychology and physics combined. I stared at her. In 32 years, my own mother had never asked me a single question about my work other than how much money I made. And here was this stranger, a woman I had met 10 minutes ago, understanding the very soul of my career. It is exactly that, I said, feeling a smile tug at the corners of my lips. It is about how people interact with the environment. We spent the next hour discussing native plant species, the politics of city contracts, and the challenges of running a minority-owned business in the construction sector. Elijah first learned was a retired state Supreme Court judge, and his questions were sharp and insightful. He did not treat me like a child. He treated me like a peer. He treated me like I was intelligent. At one point, I made a joke about a difficult client who wanted to plant palm trees in Chicago, and Elijah threw his head back and laughed, a loud, booming sound that made heads turn. You have a good head on your shoulders, Sophia, Elijah said, wiping his eyes. You built that firm from the ground up. Yes, sir, I said. I started with just a laptop and a pickup truck. Impressive, he said, nodding slowly. Most people wait for opportunities. You built yours. I felt tears prick my eyes and quickly took a sip of water to hide them. I was not used to praise. I was used to criticism. I was used to being told I was difficult, intense, too ambitious. But here, in the glow of this stranger's approval, I felt something uncoil inside me. Claire reached out and patted my hand. Her skin was soft, her touch maternal in a way I had never experienced. You must be very proud of yourself, Sophia. I looked at them, this judge and this doctor sitting across from me. They did not know my history. They did not know I had been kicked out of my family's plans via a phone call on the highway. They just saw me. They saw the woman I had worked so hard to become. For the first time all day, I did not feel like the black sheep. I did not feel like the scapegoat. I felt seen. Tell us more about this Riverwalk project, Elijah said, refilling my wine glass. I want to hear how you are going to handle the zoning commission. They are a nightmare. I laughed, and for the first time in years, the sound did not feel forced. As I launched into an explanation of the permit process, looking at their engaged faces, a thought settled in the back of my mind. It was a dangerous thought, a treacherous thought, but it was loud. I realized I was having a better Thanksgiving with two strangers than I had ever had with the people who shared my DNA. And as the night went on and the snow began to fall outside the window, I knew one thing for certain. I never wanted to go back to the table where I had to beg for a seat. The waiter had just cleared our dinner plates and placed a decadent crème brûlée in the center of the table. For a moment, amidst the clinking of spoons and the warmth of the fireplace, I had actually forgotten about the rejection that had brought me here. I was laughing at a story Claire was telling about her early days in medical school, feeling a lightness in my chest that I had not felt in years. It was the feeling of being accepted without conditions. But reality has a way of piercing through even the most perfect moments. My phone, which I had placed face down on the white tablecloth, vibrated with a harsh, persistent buzz. I should have ignored it. I should have let it buzz until the battery died. But the conditioning of a lifetime is hard to break. When your family trains you to be on call for their every whim, you answer. I flipped the phone over my heart, doing that familiar, anxious flutter. It was not a text or a call. It was an Instagram notification. At Jasmine_Sparkles just posted a photo. My thumb hovered over the screen. A part of me knew I should put the phone away, but a darker, more masochistic part of me needed to know. I tapped the notification. The image that loaded on my screen sucked the air right out of my lungs. It was a photo taken in my parents' living room, the very room I was banned from entering tonight. The fireplace was roaring, casting a cozy glow over the scene. In the center of the frame sat my mother and father, flanking Jasmine and Kyle. They were all holding mugs of hot cocoa, smiling so wide it looked like their faces might crack. But it was not the smiles that made my stomach turn. It was their clothes. They were all wearing matching red and black plaid pajamas. My mother, my father, Jasmine, and Kyle. 4 sets of matching pajamas. My hands started to shake. Matching pajamas are not a last-minute decision. You do not buy matching sets for 4 people on the morning of Thanksgiving. They had planned this. They had ordered these weeks ago. They had coordinated sizes, and they had bought exactly 4 sets. There was never a set for me. Even before they called me on the highway, even before the excuse about Jasmine's anxiety, they had already decided I was not part of the picture. I was never going to be in that photo. Then I read the caption. Finally, a peaceful Thanksgiving with my absolute favorite people. So grateful for a drama-free home and zero toxic energy allowed in this circle. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag family first. Hashtag no negativity. Toxic energy. The words blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. I blinked rapidly, trying to force them back, but the sting was undeniable. I was the toxic energy. Me. The daughter who paid for the roof repair. The sister who bought the expensive wine. The aunt who had a limited edition gaming console in the trunk of her car. I was toxic because I existed. I was toxic because I had a job that intimidated them. I was toxic because I was single and Jasmine was married. I felt a sudden wave of nausea. The crème brûlée in front of me suddenly looked unappetizing. I felt foolish in my green silk dress sitting here with these kind strangers, while my own flesh and blood were broadcasting my exclusion to the world. I felt the familiar shame creeping up my neck, that hot, prickly sensation that told me I was wrong. I was bad, I was unwanted. I went to lock my phone screen, but my hand was trembling so badly, I almost knocked over my water glass. I took a sharp breath, trying to compose myself, trying to put the mask back on. But when I looked up, I realized it was too late. Elijah and Claire were not looking at the dessert. They were looking at me. They did not look at me with the annoyance my parents usually showed when I got emotional. They did not roll their eyes like Jasmine did. Their expressions were soft, filled with a concern that felt foreign and terrifying. "Is everything all right?" Sophia Claire asked gently. Her voice was low, designed not to draw attention from the other tables. I tried to smile, but my lips quivered. "Oh yes. Just a work email. You know how it is. Never really off the clock. I was lying and I was doing a terrible job of it." Elijah set his coffee cup down on the saucer with a deliberate clink. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, interlacing his fingers. He looked at me with eyes that had seen decades of truth and lies in a courtroom. He looked at me not just as a dinner guest, but as a judge assessing a case. "Sophia," he said, his voice deep and steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. "In my 30 years on the bench, I learned to read people. I know the look of someone who just received bad news, and I know the look of someone who is trying to protect the people who hurt them." I looked down at my lap, picking at a loose thread on my napkin. I could not meet his gaze. If I looked at him, I knew I would break. He continued, his tone shifting from authoritative to something softer, almost fatherly. "In law, we make a very clear distinction between testimony and evidence. Testimony is what people say. It is their story. It is the narrative they want the jury to believe. People can say anything. They can paint themselves as saints and others as sinners. They can rewrite history with their words." He paused, waiting until I slowly lifted my head to look at him. "But evidence, Sophia. Evidence is what actually exists. It is the hard truth. It is the undeniable fact. Evidence does not care about feelings or manipulation. It simply is." He gestured vaguely toward my phone, which was now dark on the table. "Whatever you just saw on that screen, whatever narrative is being spun about you right now, that is just testimony. It is a story someone is telling to make themselves feel better or to justify their own cruelty. But the evidence is sitting right here in front of me." I held my breath, listening to him. "The evidence," Elijah said, looking me straight in the eye, "is a young woman who drove 4 hours to be with her family. A young woman who, when treated with disrespect, did not cause a scene but quietly removed herself. A young woman who has been nothing but gracious, intelligent, and warm to 2 complete strangers all evening. That is the evidence of who you are." A single tear escaped and rolled down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away, but Elijah did not look away. "Do not let their false testimony overrule the evidence of your character," he said firmly. "If they say you are the problem, but all your actions show love and effort, then their case does not hold water. Do not convict yourself for a crime you did not commit, Sophia." I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. For years I had believed my family's testimony. I believed I was difficult. I believed I was too much. I believed I was the toxic one. But Elijah was right. The evidence, the receipts, the drive, the gifts, the constant trying told a different story. Claire reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her palm was warm. "You are a delight, Sophia. Anyone who cannot see that is simply choosing to be blind." We finished our coffee in a comfortable silence. The sharp pain in my chest began to dull, replaced by a quiet resolve. I looked at my phone one last time, not to check it, but to turn it off completely. I slid it into my purse and zipped it shut. As the bill came, I reached for my wallet, insisting on paying as a thank you for their company, but Elijah raised a hand, stopping me before I could even open my bag. "Absolutely not," he said. "You are our guest. And besides, I have a feeling this isn't the last time we will have dinner together." As we walked out into the crisp November air, the valet brought my car around. The snow had started to stick to the pavement. I felt a strange reluctance to leave them. For 2 hours, I had felt more at home with these strangers than I had in 32 years with the Kings. Claire dug into her purse and pulled out a small cream-colored card. She pressed it into my hand. "This has my cell, our home number, and Elijah's number," she said. "And I mean this, Sophia. Call us. If you want to talk or if you just want to grab a coffee when you are in town. We split our time between Atlanta and Chicago. We would love to see you again." I looked at the card. The name Dr. Claire Washington was embossed in elegant gold script. "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tight. "You have no idea what tonight meant to me." "I think we do," Elijah said softly. "Drive safe, Sophia." I got into my SUV and watched in the rearview mirror as they got into their own car. I did not drive to my parents' house. I did not drive by to see the matching pajamas through the window. I pointed my car north back toward Chicago. The drive back was long and dark, but the silence in the car felt different now. It was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace. I had left Atlanta with a rejected heart, but I was returning with a small cream-colored card in my cup holder that felt like a lifeline. I did not know it then, but that card was more than just a contact number. It was the key to my future. It was the first brick in the foundation of the life I was about to build, a life where family was not defined by blood, but by who was willing to share their table with you when you had nowhere else to go. The timeline of my suffering was over. The era of my rising was about to begin. 6 months had passed since that Thanksgiving dinner, and I was living two separate lives. In one life, I was slowly building a genuine friendship with Elijah and Claire Washington. We met for coffee once a month, and they treated me with a dignity that still felt foreign to me. In my other life, the one I could not seem to escape, I was still the designated safety net for the King family. I had not seen my parents or Jasmine since they uninvited me, but that did not stop the text messages. They never texted to say hello. They never texted to ask how my business was doing. The notifications were always demands disguised as emergencies. They needed money for a new water heater. They needed money for Jasmine's prenatal vitamins, even though her husband came from money. I paid every single time. I paid because guilt is a powerful currency, and my mother knew exactly how to spend it. It was a Tuesday night in May when the phone rang. It was my father, Otis. His voice was breathless, panicked, pitched high with hysteria. "Sophia, you have to help us. It is a disaster." I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What is it, Dad? Is someone hurt?" "It is the roof," he screamed over the line. "The storm hit us hard. There is water pouring into the living room. It is ruining the hardwood floors. It is coming down right over your mother's antique cabinet. We need a contractor out here tonight, or the whole house is going to flood." I could hear rain in the background, or what I thought was rain. I could hear my mother crying in the distance. My stomach twisted. I knew the roof on their house was old. I had told them years ago to replace it, but they had spent that money on a trip to Cabo instead. "How much, Dad?" I asked, already opening my banking app. "The emergency contractor wants $5,000 up front," he said. "We do not have the liquidity right now. All our cash is tied up in Jasmine's baby shower prep. Please, Sophia. We will pay you back as soon as the insurance check clears. I promise." $5,000. That was the money I had set aside for new drafting software for my firm. It was a significant amount even for me. But the image of my childhood home flooding, of my parents bailing water in the dark, overrode my logic. "I am sending it now," I said, my thumb hovering over the transfer button. "Zelle is instant. Get the contractor. Save the house. Thank you, baby girl. You are a lifesaver. Thank you." He hung up the second the notification said, "Sent." For the next week I worried. I texted to ask how the repairs were going, but the replies were short. "It is under control. We are handling it. Busy with the workers." I wanted to drive down and help, but I remembered the Thanksgiving rejection. I stayed away, telling myself that sending the money was enough. But a week later, I had a site visit for a client who lived in the gated community just 2 streets over from my parents' house. It was a sunny Tuesday, the kind of day where the sky is a piercing, impossible blue. After I finished with my client, I found myself turning left instead of right. I just wanted to see the new roof. I wanted to see that my money had actually protected them. As I turned onto their street, I slowed my SUV to a crawl. I expected to see a dumpster in the driveway. I expected to see scaffolding, or at least the bright blue tarp that roofers use while waiting for shingles. I saw nothing. The roof looked exactly the same as it had 10 years ago. Old gray, slightly weathered, but completely intact. There were no missing shingles. There was no sign of recent work. There was definitely no emergency patch job. I pulled my car to the curb, confused. Had they fixed it so quickly that it was invisible? Had the damage been internal? Then the garage door began to rise. I watched, holding my breath. I expected to see my father's old sedan or maybe a contractor's truck. Instead, a bright candy apple red vehicle backed slowly out of the darkness. It was a custom golf cart. It had lifted suspension chrome rims and leather seats that looked softer than my living room sofa. Behind the wheel sat Kyle wearing sunglasses and a polo shirt. Next to him was Jasmine laughing, holding a tumbler of iced tea. My parents were standing in the driveway waving them off like they were sending royalty on a parade. "Look at you go," my mother cheered, clapping her hands. "It fits perfectly in the garage." My blood turned to ice. A custom golf cart like that started at $4,000. With the lift kit and the rims, it was easily $5,000. My $5,000. I did not think. I did not calculate. I slammed my car into park and threw the door open. I marched up the driveway, my heels clicking loudly on the asphalt. Sophia, my father said, his smile dropping instantly. "What are you doing here?" Kyle slammed on the brakes of the golf cart, looking annoyed. "Great. The fun police is here." I ignored him. I walked straight up to my father, my finger pointing at the roof. "Where is the hole, Dad?" He blinked, taking a step back. "What? The hole in the roof?" I said, my voice shaking with rage. "The emergency. The water pouring onto the hardwood floors. Where is the contractor you needed cash for at midnight?" My mother stepped in front of my father, her face hardening into that familiar stone mask. "Lower your voice, Sophia. The neighbors are watching." "I do not care about the neighbors," I yelled. "I care about the $5,000 I sent you to save this house. You lied to me. You faked an emergency to buy a toy for Kyle." "It is not a toy," Jasmine chimed in from the passenger seat, looking bored. "It is a neighborhood electric vehicle. Kyle needs it to get to the clubhouse. Walking hurts his knees." "His knees," I repeated, incredulous. Kyle was 29 years old and played tennis 3 times a week. "We did have a leak," my father muttered, looking at his shoes. "But, well, I went up there and patched it with some sealant. It cost $20. So where is my change?" I demanded. "Where is the other $4,980? Silence stretched across the driveway. Kyle drummed his fingers on the steering wheel of the golf cart purchased with my hard-earned money. My mother crossed her arms. Her eyes narrowed and she delivered the blow she had been saving. "You are being incredibly petty, Sophia." "Petty," I choked out. "You stole from me. That is fraud." "We are your parents," she hissed, stepping closer. "We fed you. We clothed you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. Do you have any idea how much that cost? Do you have any idea how much we sacrificed so you could go to school and start that fancy business of yours?" "I paid for my own college," I reminded her. "I took out loans. And who signed the permission slips? Who drove you to the bus stop?" she countered, rewriting history in real time. "The money you sent us. Consider it a raising fee. Consider it back pay for the burden of raising a difficult child. You have plenty of money. Look at your car. Look at your clothes. Why do you begrudge your sister a little happiness? Kyle has been stressed. He needed this." I looked at them. I looked at the shiny red cart. I looked at my sister, who was smirking because she knew once again she had won. They did not see me as a person. They saw me as a resource to be harvested. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slash the tires of that cart. But Elijah's voice floated into my mind from 6 months ago. "Evidence. The evidence is right here. They stole from you, and they do not care," a voice inside me whispered. "Fine," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Keep the cart. Sophia, do not be like that. My father started sensing the shift in my energy. No, keep it, I said, backing away. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it was worth it. Because that is the last check you will ever write from the Bank of Sophia. Do not call me when the roof actually caves in. Do not call me when the water heater breaks. I turned around and walked back to my car. Oh, stop being dramatic, my mother called out after me. You will get over it. You always do. We are family. You cannot just walk away. I got into my car and slammed the door. I watched them in the rearview mirror as I drove away. They were already laughing again, Kyle revving the electric motor. They thought this was just another tantrum. They thought I would cool off and send a check for Christmas. They were wrong. As I drove out of the subdivision, I did not cry. I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my chest. They had taken my money, yes, but they had given me something much more valuable in return. They had given me the absolute certainty that I owed them nothing. The bridge was not just burned. They had blown it up with a $5,000 golf cart, and I was never going to rebuild it. 3 months of silence followed the golf cart incident. 3 months where I focused on my business, landing a contract to redesign the green spaces for a new tech campus downtown. I was busy, successful, and for the first time in a long time, peaceful. I foolishly thought that perhaps my parents had learned a lesson. I thought that by drawing a boundary, I had forced them to respect me. I should have known better. Toxic families do not learn lessons, they just regroup and change their tactics. The silence broke on a Saturday morning with a text from Jasmine. It was a location pin and a short message. Housewarming, today. 2 p.m. Do not be late. I stared at the phone. My instinct was to ignore it. But then came a follow-up text from my mother. Your father has high blood pressure. He really wants the whole family together. Please just come for an hour. Do not kill him with stress. They knew exactly which buttons to push. They weaponized my father's health whenever they needed compliance. So against my better judgment, I put on a designer jumpsuit, grabbed a bottle of nice olive oil as a gift, and drove to the address. The house was located in a new flashy development called The Estates. It was a massive, sprawling structure that screamed new money. It had columns that were too big for the porch and faux stone cladding that looked plastic up close. It was exactly the kind of house Kyle would buy, ostentatious, loud, and completely lacking in substance. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw my parents' car already there. I took a deep breath, put on my customer service smile, and walked to the front door. Kyle answered before I could even ring the bell. He was wearing boat shoes and holding a craft beer, looking every bit the lord of the manor. Finally, he said, not stepping aside to let me in, but walking past me out onto the porch. You are late, but whatever. Come around the back. I have a job for you. A job? I frowned, but followed him. We walked around the side of the massive house to the backyard. Or rather, what should have been a backyard. It was a disaster zone of mud, weeds, and construction debris. It looked like a bomb had gone off in a swamp. This is the project, Kyle said, sweeping his hand over the mess, like he was showing me the gardens of Versailles. The builder wanted to charge me 10 grand to sod and landscape this. Total ripoff. I told Jasmine, why pay a stranger when your sister plays in the dirt for a living? I stopped walking. The phrase played in the dirt echoed in my ears. It was the same insult they had used since I was in college. Kyle took a sip of his beer and pointed to a pile of rusty shovels and rakes leaning against the fence. So here's the deal. I need this cleared, leveled, and I want grass put down by next weekend. We are hosting a BBQ for my partners. I figured you could knock this out this afternoon and tomorrow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled bill. He held it out to me. Here is $50. Consider it a deposit. I will give you another 50 when it is done. And hey, I am doing you a favor. I know things are probably slow for you, so this is my way of supporting Black-owned businesses. He smirked. That arrogant, condescending smirk that made me want to scream. I looked at the $50 bill fluttering in his hand. Then I looked at the acre of mud. Then I looked at him. Kyle, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. My firm designs urban parks and corporate campuses. We handle million-dollar contracts. I do not mow lawns, and I certainly do not clear construction debris for $50. Kyle laughed a sharp barking sound. Whoa, easy there, Tiger. Do not get all sensitive on me. It is just gardening. How hard can it be? You dig a hole, you put a plant in it. I am offering you cash under the table. No taxes. You should be thanking me. I felt the heat rising up my neck. It was not just the lowball offer. It was the complete erasure of my education, my license, and my hard work. My consulting fee is $200 an hour, I said, staring him down. And for a project this size with the drainage issues I can clearly see from here, you are looking at a minimum of $15,000 for a basic landscape plan. And that does not include labor. Kyle's face turned red. 15,000. Are you out of your mind? You are trying to rip off your own family. Suddenly, the back door slid open. My parents and Jasmine stepped out onto the patio. They had been watching. Of course they had been watching. What is going on? My mother asked, her voice sharp. Why is everyone shouting? Sophia is trying to price gouge us, Kyle said, pointing an accusing finger at me. I offered her a job to help her out and she is quoting me corporate rates. She wants 15 grand to plant some grass. My mother turned to me, her eyes wide with disbelief. Sophia, are you serious? Mom, he wants me to clear an acre of mud by hand for $50, I said, my voice rising. That is insulting. I am a licensed landscape architect. I am not a day laborer. Oh, get over yourself, Jasmine chimed in, leaning against the railing. She looked at her fingernails, bored. You always have to make everything so complicated. It is just dirt, Sophia. You love plants. We thought you would enjoy doing it. It is a bonding activity. Bonding, I repeated. Me slaving away in the mud while you guys drink wine on the patio is bonding. You have changed. Sophia, my father said, shaking his head sadly. He looked at me like I had committed a crime. You used to be helpful. You used to be humble. Now you talk about hourly rates and contracts with your own flesh and blood. Where did we go wrong with you? We went wrong by letting her think she is better than us, Kyle sneered. I am not better than you, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. I just respect myself, and I respect my profession. If you want a gardener, hire one. But do not insult me by pretending you are doing me a favor. I turned to leave. If you walk away now, my mother yelled, her voice echoing off the plastic siding of the house. Do not expect to stay for dinner. We do not break bread with people who turn their backs on family. I did not stop. I did not turn around. I kept walking past the mud, past the rusty shovels, past the $50 bill that Kyle had dropped on the ground. Fine, I called back without looking. Enjoy your mud pit. I got into my car and drove away, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. I went straight home, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat in my living room trying to calm my racing heart. I felt guilty. That was the programming they had installed in me. I felt guilty for saying no to being exploited. 2 hours later, my phone pinged. It was a Facebook notification. My mother had tagged me in a post. I opened the app, bracing myself. There was a photo of Jasmine and Kyle standing in their messy backyard, looking sad and dejected. The caption read, "So heartbroken today." We tried to support a local family business to help fix up the kids' new home, but apparently some people get a little bit of success and forget where they came from. It hurts when you raise a child to be kind and they turn out to be greedy and ungrateful. Snakes in the grass bite the hardest. Praying for humble hearts. Hashtag family betrayal, hashtag ungrateful, hashtag money changes people. Below the post, the comments from their church friends and extended family were already pouring in. So sorry to hear that, Brenda. Keep praying for her. Money is the root of all evil. Shame on her for turning her back on you. I read the comments one by one. I saw my aunts and cousins liking the post. I saw the community I grew up in judging me based on a lie. I put the phone down. I did not reply. I did not defend myself. Elijah's voice came back to me. Evidence versus testimony. Their Facebook post was testimony. My success, my integrity, and my boundaries were the evidence. Let them talk, I whispered to the empty room. Let them dig their own grave. I blocked my parents on Facebook that night. I blocked Jasmine. I blocked Kyle. It was the final digital severance. They had tried to humiliate me professionally to reduce my career to a chore worth $50. but all they had done was confirm that they did not deserve access to my life, my skills, or my heart. I was done being their gardener, I was done being their banker, and I was definitely done being their scapegoat. The next time they saw me, it wouldn't be in a muddy backyard. It would be somewhere they could not touch me. The blockade on my phone lasted for months, but familial guilt is a powerful drug, and my mother knew exactly how to administer the dose. The invitation for her 60th birthday party came in the mail, heavy cardstock embossed with gold foil. It was not just a dinner, it was a coronation. She was renting a private room at a country club, inviting every deacon cousin and neighbor she had ever known. The message was clear. If I did not show up, I would be publicly declaring war on the matriarch of the family. So against the screaming instincts of my gut, I decided to go. I told myself it was for peace. I told myself that 60 was a milestone and I would regret it if I missed it. I wanted to bridge the gap, so I went to a high-end boutique downtown and purchased a soft cognac leather tote bag. It cost $500. It was elegant, timeless, and exactly the kind of luxury item my mother would never buy for herself, but would love to show off to her friends. I wrapped it in shimmering gold paper and tied it with a silk ribbon. I looked at the gift sitting on my passenger seat as I drove to the venue, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this tangible offering would buy me a night of truce. When I walked into the banquet hall, the air was thick with perfume, and the sound of R&B classics playing softly in the background. My mother was sitting at the head table wearing a sequined gown that caught the light with every breath. I approached her, forcing a smile, and placed the gold box in front of her. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. She offered me her cheek like a queen offers a ring to be kissed, barely turning her head. "You came," she said, her voice flat. "We were taking bets on whether you would feel too superior to join us." I ignored the jab. "Open it," I said softly. She tore the paper with indifferent fingers. When she pulled out the leather bag for a split second, her eyes widened. She knew quality. She ran her hand over the grain of the leather. "Oh," she said, "it is nice, just nice. Not thank you. Not, I love it. Just nice." "I thought you could use it for church," I started to say, but before I could finish my sentence, the double doors of the hall swung open with a dramatic bang. Jasmine and Kyle breezed in. They were 40 minutes late, but they walked with the confidence of headliners arriving at a concert. Jasmine was wearing a tight dress that showed off her figure, and Kyle was trailing behind her, looking smug. They were empty-handed. No box, no bag, no card. My mother's attention snapped away from me instantly. "Jasmine, baby, you made it." Jasmine walked straight to the head table, bypassing the guests, bypassing me. She stood next to Mom and clapped her hands for attention. The DJ actually lowered the music. "Sorry we are late, everyone," Jasmine announced, her voice projecting to the back of the room. "We had a little medical appointment that ran long. But we did not bring a gift in a box because our gift is a little bigger than that." She placed a hand on her perfectly flat stomach and beamed. "Mom? Dad, you are going to be grandparents again. We are expecting." The room erupted. My aunt screamed. My mother let out a shriek of pure, unadulterated joy. And in her haste to stand up and embrace Jasmine, she knocked the $500 leather tote off the table. I watched in slow motion as the bag hit the floor. It landed near her feet and she stepped on it. She actually stepped on the soft cognac leather with her heel as she rushed to wrap Jasmine in a bear hug. "Oh, my baby, Mom sobbed, rocking Jasmine back and forth. "This is the best gift I have ever received. The best." I stood there frozen. I knew for a fact that Jasmine was not pregnant. Just 2 weeks ago, I had seen a mutual friend post a photo of Jasmine doing tequila shots at a bachelorette party. This was a lie. It was a performance designed to reclaim the spotlight because she had shown up empty-handed. But the truth did not matter. The room was worshiping her. I bent down and picked up the bag. There was a scuff mark on the leather from my mother's shoe. I placed it back on the table, but I knew it would likely be left behind or given away. I was invisible again. I retreated to the bar needing a drink to numb the sting of rejection. I ordered a sparkling water, trying to keep a clear head so I could leave as soon as the cake was cut. I was standing near a high-top table checking my watch when I felt a presence beside me. It was Kyle. He was holding a glass of red wine, swaying slightly. So he said, his voice dripping with venom. The gardener showed up. "Did you park your truck out back?" I gripped my glass. "Hello, Kyle. Congratulations on the news. Even though we both know it is biologically impossible given what you were drinking last weekend." His eyes narrowed. "You think you are so smart, don't you, Sophia? You think because you have a little company and wear fancy clothes that you are better than this family." I turned to face him. "I do not think I am better. I just think I deserve to be treated with basic respect." "Respect is earned," Kyle sneered. "And you haven't earned anything. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who buys expensive gifts to try and buy love. It is pathetic." He gestured with his hand, a wild, sweeping motion, and the contents of his wine glass launched into the air. The dark red liquid splashed across the front of my cream-colored silk blouse. It soaked into the fabric, instantly looking like a fresh wound. The cold liquid seeped through to my skin. I gasped, stepping back, looking down at the ruin of my outfit. "Oops," Kyle said. His face held zero remorse. He was smiling. The chatter in the room stopped. People turned to look. My mother looked over from the head table, still holding Jasmine's hand. "Oh, Kyle, be careful," my mother called out. But she was not scolding him. She sounded amused. Kyle shrugged, looking at me with dead eyes. "My bad. But hey, do not worry about it, Sophia. It is just a dress. It looks like cheap polyester anyway. It will probably wash right out." He chuckled. A low, mocking sound. And then the worst thing happened. My mother laughed. Jasmine giggled. And slowly the rest of the room joined in. My aunts, my cousins, the neighbors. They were all laughing at the woman standing there covered in wine. In their eyes, I was not the victim. I was the joke. I was the stiff, stuck-up daughter who needed to be taken down a peg. The wine spill wasn't an accident. It was a correction. I looked at their faces. These were the people I shared DNA with. These were the people I had spent 30 years trying to please, and they were laughing while I stood there humiliated. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock finally turning. I did not scream. I did not throw my drink back at him. I simply set my glass down on the table. I picked up my purse. "Leaving so soon?" Jasmine called out, smirking. "You are going to miss the cake." I looked at her, then at my mother, who was wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "I hope the baby is healthy, Jasmine," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And Mom, happy birthday. I hope the bag was worth the step." I turned and walked out. The laughter faded behind me, replaced by the heavy thud of the door closing. I walked to my car in the cool night air, the wine sticky on my skin. I did not cry. I was done crying. As I started the engine, I made a promise to myself. I would never step foot in a room with these people again, unless I owned the building. And knowing my trajectory compared to theirs that day was coming sooner than they thought. December 25th arrived with a blanket of fresh snow covering Chicago, but for the first time in my life, I did not wake up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. For 32 years, Christmas morning had been a military operation of stress. It meant waking up early to cook sides that my mother would criticize, wrapping gifts that would be compared to Jasmine's, and walking on eggshells to avoid setting off my father's temper. But this year, my phone was on silent. I had sent a polite card to my parents weeks ago, and that was it. No expensive wine, no frantic driving, no begging for approval. Instead, I drove to the suburb of Evanston, pulling into the long, winding driveway of the Washington estate. The house was magnificent, a stone manor that looked like it belonged in a history book, but it was the atmosphere that struck me the most. When I walked through the front door, I was not greeted by the sound of screaming arguments or the blaring of a television. I was greeted by the smell of real pine cinnamon and roasting ham. Miles Davis was playing softly on a turntable. It was quiet, but it was a warm, full kind of quiet. It was the sound of peace. Claire met me at the door wearing a cashmere sweater that looked softer than anything I owned. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender. "Merry Christmas, Sophia," she said, and she held the hug for a moment longer than necessary, as if she was trying to transfer some of her strength into me. "Come in, get warm. You look like you have been carrying the weight of the world, and today you are officially off duty." She led me into the kitchen where the chaos I was used to simply did not exist. In my mother's kitchen, Christmas cooking was a contact sport filled with insults and panic. Here Claire was moving calmly between the oven and the island sipping tea. She poured me a cup and leaned against the counter. "Sophia," she said, looking at my face. "You have dark circles under your eyes. Are you sleeping?" I hesitated. Work has been busy, and while the holidays are complicated. Claire reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "Listen to me. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You spend so much time building structures and landscapes for other people, but you have to tend to your own garden too. Taking care of yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. Today, I do not want you to lift a finger. You are not the help here. You are the guest." I felt a lump form in my throat. I was so used to being the designated servant at family gatherings, the one who refreshed drinks, cleared plates, and managed tantrums, that being told to simply exist felt like a luxury I did not deserve. I wandered into the library where Elijah was sitting by the fire with a thick book. The room was lined with mahogany shelves, floor to ceiling. He looked up and smiled, removing his reading glasses. "Sophia," he said, gesturing to the leather armchair opposite him. "Come sit. I was just looking over the portfolio you showed me last week. The Riverwalk project." I sat down, bracing myself for a critique. "It is brilliant," he said simply. "But I have a question. Why are you renting your office space downtown?" I blinked, surprised by the pivot. "Well, real estate in the Loop is expensive. Renting seemed safer." Elijah closed his book and leaned forward. His expression was serious but kind. It was the look of a mentor. "Safe keeps you stagnant, Sophia. You have the capital. I looked at your numbers. Stop paying a landlord. Buy the building. Equity is power. In this country, you are either the tenant or the landlord, and a woman with your vision should never be a tenant. If you need guidance on the commercial mortgage process, I will walk you through it. But start owning your ground. Literally." I listened to him, absorbing every word. My own father had only ever called me for money to fix his own mistakes. He had never once offered me advice on how to grow my wealth. He viewed my money as his emergency fund. Elijah viewed my money as a tool for my liberation. We spent the next hour mapping out a 5-year investment strategy on a notepad. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just working a job. I was building an empire. Just as Elijah was explaining the benefits of a diverse portfolio, the heavy oak doors of the library opened. I froze. I expected a relative, maybe a cousin or an aunt. Instead, a man walked in. He was tall, wearing a charcoal sweater and dark denim. He had a presence that filled the room, not because he was loud like Kyle, but because he seemed completely at ease in his own skin. He had deep, intelligent eyes and a groomed beard that framed a strong jawline. "Dad," the man said, his voice a smooth baritone. "Mom says if you do not come carve the turkey in 5 minutes, she is going to let me do it, and we both know I will butcher it." Elijah laughed, standing up. "Sophia, this is Marcus. He is the son of my oldest friend from law school. Marcus, this is Sophia, the landscape architect I told you about." Marcus turned his gaze toward me. He did not look me up and down like a piece of meat. He looked me in the eye. He smiled, and it was a genuine, slow smile that reached his eyes. "The landscape architect," he repeated, extending a hand. "The one who did the sensory garden at the children's hospital." I took his hand. His grip was firm and warm. "You know that project." "Know it," Marcus said, not letting go of my hand right away. "My tech firm donated the tablets for the educational center there. I walked through the garden myself. The way you use texture and scent for visually impaired children, it was profound. Most people just plant flowers. You engineered an experience. It was brilliant work. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, and for once it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from the shock of being understood. Kyle had called my work playing in the dirt. Marcus called it profound engineering. Thank you, I managed to say. Mind if I join you? He asked, pointing to the spot on the rug near the fire. Please, I said. Elijah excused himself to deal with the turkey, leaving us alone. I braced myself for the awkward small talk, but it never came. Marcus sat down and immediately engaged me. He didn't talk about himself. He didn't brag about his car or his watch. He asked me about the challenges of integrating green infrastructure into concrete jungles. He asked me about my favorite botanicals. He was the CEO of a major tech company, a man who dealt in code and silicon, yet he had the emotional intelligence to meet me where I was. So Marcus said, leaning back, looking at me with an intensity that made my heart stutter. How does a woman who builds sanctuaries for everyone else find her own peace? I looked at him, startled by the depth of the question. I am still working on that, I admitted honestly. Well, he said, his voice soft. If you ever need help scouting locations for that peace, let me know. I have a pretty good eye for hidden gems. We stared at each other for a beat too long. In the background, the fire crackled and the smell of roasting turkey drifted in from the kitchen. For the first time in 32 years, Christmas didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like a beginning. Sitting there between the wisdom of Elijah, the care of Claire, and the attentive gaze of Marcus, I realized how stark the difference was. My biological family offered me crumbs and demanded a feast in return. These people offered me a seat at the table and asked for nothing but my company. And as Marcus smiled at me again, I knew I was in big trouble, because looking at him felt dangerously like coming home. Spring had arrived in Chicago, bringing with it the kind of relentless damp chill that seeps into your bones, but I barely noticed the weather. My firm had won the contract for the Riverwalk expansion, and I was spending 12 hours a day on site wearing a hard hat and navigating through mud and rebar. I was exhausted, but it was a good kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from building something tangible. It was a Thursday afternoon when the pain started. At first, I thought it was just hunger or maybe stress from the deadline, but within an hour, the dull ache in my lower abdomen had transformed into a searing, white-hot agony that doubled me over. I was standing near the cement mixers reviewing blueprints with my foreman when the world suddenly tilted on its axis. My vision blurred at the edges, narrowing into a dark tunnel, and the ground seemed to rush up to meet me. I heard someone shouting my name, but it sounded like they were underwater. The next thing I knew, I was looking up at the gray sky while the foreman hovered over me, his face pale with panic, telling me the ambulance was on its way. The ride to the emergency room was a blur of sirens and potholes, every bump sending a fresh shockwave of torture through my body. By the time they wheeled me into the trauma bay, I was drenched in cold sweat and shivering uncontrollably. The doctors moved with terrifying speed, hooking me up to monitors and pressing on my stomach, which made me scream out loud. The diagnosis came swiftly. It was my appendix, and it had already ruptured. The surgeon, a stern woman with kind eyes, told me I was at risk of sepsis and needed emergency surgery immediately. She placed a clipboard in my trembling hands and asked if there was anyone they should call, someone to be there when I woke up, someone to make decisions if things went wrong on the table. My brain was foggy from the pain and the medication they had just pushed into my IV. But instinct is a powerful thing. Even after the golf cart incident, even after the birthday party, humiliation and the months of silence, my first instinct was still to call my mother. I was lying on a gurney, frightened and alone, facing a life-threatening surgery, and the little girl inside me just wanted her mom. I reached for my phone with shaking fingers and dialed Brenda. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I prayed she would answer. I prayed that for once she would just be a mother. Hello? Her voice came through the speaker, loud and distorted. Mom? I rasped out, my throat dry as sandpaper. Mom. I am in the hospital. There was a pause. In the background, I did not hear concern or silence. I heard the rhythmic crashing of waves. I heard the cheerful melody of a steel drum band. I heard clinking glasses and laughter. The hospital. Brenda repeated, but she did not sound worried, she sounded annoyed. Sophia, we are in the Nassau. It is Jasmine and Kyle's anniversary trip. You know this. We have been planning this for months. I gripped the phone tighter, tears leaking from my eyes. Mom, please listen. My appendix ruptured. The doctor says it is bad. I need surgery right now. I am scared. A heavy sigh crackled through the line. The kind of sigh you give when a telemarketer interrupts your dinner. Sophia, honestly, you are a grown woman. It is just an appendix. People get them out every day. It is a routine procedure. Why are you calling me and ruining the vibe here? Jasmine is finally relaxing. But Mom, I whispered, the pain in my stomach now rivaled by the crushing weight in my chest. I might have sepsis. I just wanted you to know. Well, now I know. Brenda said, her voice hard. But there is nothing I can do from the Bahamas, is there? I cannot fly back and hold your hand. You have insurance. You have doctors. Handle it yourself. We are going to dinner. Do not call back and upset your sister. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, the screen going black. The background noise of the tropical paradise was gone, replaced by the sterile beeping of the heart monitor next to me. She had not even asked which hospital I was in. She had not asked if I was going to be okay. She had simply told me I was an inconvenience to her vacation and hung up. I lay there for a moment, letting the reality wash over me. I could die on this table today, and my mother would probably complain that my funeral interfered with her spa appointment. The realization was not sharp like the physical pain, it was heavy and suffocating. I was truly an orphan. I had living parents, but I had no family. The nurse appeared at my side, looking sympathetic. Is someone coming, honey? We need to get you to the operating room. I looked at my phone again. I had one call left in me before the darkness took over. My fingers hovered over the contacts. I could call my employees, but they were my staff. I could call a friend, but everyone was at work. Then I remembered the cream-colored card I kept in my wallet, the one from Thanksgiving 2 years ago. I pulled up the number for Dr. Claire Washington. I hesitated. I was not their child. I was just a girl they had shared a meal with a few times. I was a project Elijah was mentoring. Calling them for a medical emergency felt like crossing a line, like I was imposing my drama on their peaceful lives, just like my mother said I did. But the fear was overwhelming. I did not want to close my eyes without knowing someone in the world cared if I opened them again. I pressed call. Claire answered on the second ring. Hello, Sophia? Claire. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked into a sob. I am so sorry to bother you. I did not know who else to call. I am at the City Memorial Hospital. My appendix burst. They are taking me into surgery. There was no hesitation. There was no sigh. There was no background noise of a life more important than mine. Which wing are you in? Claire asked, her voice turning instantly from casual to clinical and commanding. Trauma Bay 4. We are on our way, Claire said firmly. Elijah is getting the car. I know the chief of surgery there. I am going to call him right now to make sure you have the best team. Sophia, listen to me. Yes, I whispered. You are not alone. We are coming. Do not worry about anything. Just breathe. We will be there before you wake up. The relief that flooded through me was so potent, it almost acted as a sedative. She did not ask why I had not called my parents. She did not ask if I had insurance. She simply said, we are coming. The nurse came back to wheel me away. I dropped the phone onto my chest, my hand falling limp. As the lights of the hallway flashed overhead like a strobing tunnel, I closed my eyes. The last thing I thought about was not the pain or the fear, or the mother who was sipping a cocktail in the Bahamas while I bled. It was the voice of a woman who shared no blood with me, saying the 3 words I had waited my whole life to hear. We are coming. And for the first time in 32 years, I believed that someone actually would. The darkness that was encroaching on my vision was suddenly pierced by a flurry of activity that felt different from the chaotic panic of the trauma bay. The curtains were whipped back and I heard the authoritative click of dress shoes on the linoleum floor. A man in a white coat, the chief of surgery, walked in with a purpose that made the residents straighten their spines. He looked at my chart and then looked at me with a reassurance that had been missing just moments ago. He told me that Dr. Washington had called him personally and that I was now his top priority. I was too weak to speak, but tears of relief leaked from the corners of my eyes. Then I saw him. Elijah walked into the room not as a judge and not as a friend, but as a force of nature. He was wearing his coat over his pajamas, a sight I had never seen from the always impeccable man. He walked straight to my bedside and took my cold hand in his warm ones. He told the nurse that he was assuming emergency guardianship as my medical proxy, since my biological parents were out of the country and unreachable. He signed the papers with a flourish of his pen, the scratching sound echoing in the quiet room like a gavel striking a block. For the first time all day, I felt safe. As the anesthesia mask was lowered over my face, Elijah leaned close to my ear. He whispered that they would be right here when I woke up. He promised me. And as I drifted into the black void, I held on to that promise like a lifeline. Waking up from surgery is a disorientation unlike any other. The world comes back in fragments of light and sound. The first thing I registered was the steady rhythmic beeping of the monitor. The second was a dull, throbbing ache in my side. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my eyes, expecting to see the empty white walls of a recovery room. I expected to be alone, just as my mother had said I would be. But as my vision sharpened, I realized the room was not empty. Someone was sleeping in the uncomfortable vinyl chair in the corner, his long legs stretched out awkwardly. It was Marcus. He was still wearing his work suit, but his tie was undone and his jacket was folded over the armrest. He looked exhausted. I shifted slightly, and the rustle of the sheets made his eyes snap open instantly. He was at my side in a second, pouring a cup of water with a straw and holding it to my lips. He told me to drink slowly. His voice was rough with sleep, but incredibly gentle. I drank the water, the cool liquid soothing my parched throat. I asked him how long I had been out. "You gave us a scare, Sophia," he said, brushing a stray hair off my forehead. "You have been in recovery for 4 hours. The surgery went well, but it was messy. The doctor said you got there just in time. Another hour, and the infection would have spread." I looked around the room. "Where are Claire and Elijah?" Marcus smiled, pointing to the small sofa on the other side of the room. Claire was curled up under a hospital blanket, fast asleep, and Elijah was sitting next to her reading a magazine by the dim light of the window. Hearing our voices, Elijah looked up, and the relief that washed over his face was so profound it made my heart ache. He stood up and walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Welcome back," he said softly. "We were worried. I stayed in that hospital room for 3 days, and for 3 days I was never alone for more than 5 minutes. Claire brought me homemade broth because she said the hospital food would slow down my healing." Elijah sat with me and read the newspaper aloud, filling the silence with his steady, comforting voice. Marcus worked remotely from his laptop in the corner, taking conference calls in the hallway, but always returning to make sure I was comfortable. They rotated shifts like a well-oiled machine, ensuring that every time I opened my eyes, I saw a friendly face. But amidst the warmth and care, there was a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach that would not go away. Every time my phone vibrated on the bedside table, my heart would jump. I kept checking it, hoping against hope. I told myself that maybe the service in the Bahamas was bad. Maybe my mother had lost her phone. Maybe they were frantically trying to get a flight back and just couldn't get through. I checked my phone on the first morning. Nothing. I checked it on the second afternoon. Nothing. I checked it on the third day as the nurse was helping me pack my bag for discharge. Still nothing. Not a missed call, not a voicemail, not a text asking if I was alive. My biological parents knew I was going into emergency surgery, and they had not checked in once. They were ghosts haunting my life with their absence. Marcus drove me home. He helped me up the stairs to my apartment carrying my bag and settling me onto the couch with a mountain of pillows. He had already stocked my fridge with groceries and picked up my prescriptions. As he was in the kitchen making me tea, my phone finally pinged with a text message. My hands shook as I reached for it. It was from Jasmine. I opened the message expecting perhaps a belated check-in. Maybe Mom had finally told her. Maybe they were landing at the airport now. The message read, "Mom just told me you called her crying about a stomach ache." Seriously, Sophia, do you have to be the center of attention even when we are thousands of miles away? Mom says you are probably just faking it to make us feel guilty for enjoying our vacation. You are so selfish. We are trying to celebrate my anniversary, and you are blowing up Mom's phone with drama. Do not expect us to bring you a souvenir. I stared at the words on the screen. Selfish. Faking it. Drama. I had almost died. I had organs removed from my body. I had spent 3 days in a hospital bed hooked up to IV antibiotics. And to them, I was just a nuisance. I was a distraction from their cocktails and their beach photos. Something inside me broke, but it wasn't the shattering kind of break. It was the breaking of chains. It was the snapping of the heavy, rusty shackles I had been dragging around for 32 years. I looked at the kitchen where Marcus was whistling softly while waiting for the kettle to boil. I thought about Claire sleeping on a hospital sofa. I thought about Elijah signing his name to protect me. That was love. That was family. What was on my phone screen was not family. It was abuse disguised as blood relation. I did not reply to Jasmine. I did not send her a picture of my surgical scar. I did not send her the hospital bill. I did not try to defend myself or explain the severity of sepsis. I realized in that moment that no amount of proof would ever be enough for people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I pressed my thumb onto Jasmine's name. I scrolled down to the bottom of the contact card. The red letters stared back at me. Block caller. I pressed it. Then I went to my mother's contact. Block caller. Then my father. Block caller. Then Kyle. Block caller. I blocked them on everything. Phone, WhatsApp, email, Instagram, Facebook. With each tap of my finger, I felt lighter. The crushing weight of expectation, the constant fear of their judgment, the desperate need for their validation, it all evaporated. I was cutting off the gangrenous limb to save the rest of the body. Marcus walked back into the room with 2 mugs of tea. He saw me holding the phone, my face wet with silent tears, but my expression peaceful. "Is everything okay?" he asked, setting the mugs down and sitting beside me. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I told the absolute truth without shame. "Yes," I said, placing the phone face down on the table. "It is finally okay. I just took out the rest of the trash." I leaned my head on his shoulder and closed my eyes. The silence in the room was not empty. It was full of possibility. I was an orphan by choice now, but I was no longer alone. And as I sipped my tea, I knew that I would heal. The scar on my stomach would fade, but the strength I found in that moment would last forever. The weeks following my surgery were filled with a peace I had never known. For the first time, I was not looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was recovering in my apartment, but I spent most of my evenings at the Washington estate. It was on a rainy Tuesday evening, about a month after I had blocked my biological family, that Elijah asked me to join him in his study. The study was my favorite room in the house. It smelled of old paper leather and pipe tobacco, a scent that I had come to associate with safety. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling oak bookshelves filled with legal texts and history books. A fire was crackling in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the Persian rug. Elijah was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, a serious expression on his face. He did not have a book open this time. Instead, A thick manila folder sat in the center of the desk, his hands resting on top of it. "Sit down, Sophia," he said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite him. I sat, feeling a sudden spike of anxiety. The last time a parental figure had called me for a serious talk, I had been uninvited from Thanksgiving. Elijah saw my tension and softened his expression, but his voice remained grave. "We need to talk about the future," he began. "Not just your emotional future, but your legal standing. When you were in the hospital, I was able to act as your proxy because of an emergency order. But that was a temporary measure. If God forbid something happened to you tomorrow, the law would default back to your next of kin." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Your next of kin are Otis and Brenda King." I shuddered. The thought of my parents making medical decisions for me, or managing my estate if I were incapacitated, was terrifying. They would probably pull the plug just to save on hospital parking fees. "I have a will," I said quietly. "A will can be contested," Elijah said, his judge voice taking over. "Especially by biological parents who claim they were estranged due to mental instability or undue influence. I have seen it happen 1,000 times in probate court. Greedy relatives coming out of the woodwork to pick the bones of the deceased." He tapped the file on the desk. "Sophia, you are a successful business owner. You are building equity. And I know things are getting serious with Marcus. When you marry him, you are going to be entering a level of wealth and visibility that you have not experienced before. Your biological family may be silent now because they think you are just being petty. But the moment they realize you have access to the kind of capital Marcus has, or the moment they see your business evaluation, they will come back. And they will come back with lawyers." I felt cold. He was right. My parents smelled money like sharks smelled blood. "So what do I do?" I asked. Elijah opened the folder. Inside were stacks of documents dense with legal jargon. "In the state of Illinois, as in many states, there is a statute for adult adoption," he explained. "It is a legal process where one adult adopts another. It is not about raising a child. It is about establishing a legal parent-child relationship that supersedes biology." He looked me in the eye, his gaze intense and unwavering. "If Claire and I adopt you, the law severs all legal ties between you and the Kings. They would no longer be your heirs, they would have no right to your medical information, they would have no standing to contest your will. In the eyes of the court, they would be strangers. And in the eyes of the court, you would be our daughter. Fully. Irrevocably." My breath caught in my throat. I looked from the papers to Elijah's face. You want to adopt me?" I whispered. "But I am 32. "I do not care if you are 52, Elijah said firmly. "A parent is not just someone who changes diapers. A parent is a shield. A parent is a guide. Claire and I love you, Sophia. We have loved you since you sat at our table and ate a steak alone with your head held high. We want to be your protection. We want to be your family, too. Not just in our hearts, but on paper." Tears welled up in my eyes, hot and fast. I had spent my entire life begging my biological parents to claim me. I had bought their love with tuition money, with roof repairs, with expensive wine. And here was this man, this distinguished, powerful man, offering to claim me simply because he wanted to. "But why?" I choked out. "You do not have to do this. It is a hassle. It is paperwork. Because you deserve a father who protects your assets, not one who drains them," Elijah said, his voice cracking slightly. "And you deserve a mother who worries about your surgery, not her vacation. Let us do this for you. Let us be the line of defense between you and them." I looked at the document. Petition for adoption of an adult. The words blurred through my tears. I thought about the golf cart. I thought about the matching pajamas. I thought about the lonely drive on the highway. And then I looked at Elijah, who was looking at me with nothing but hope and pride. "Okay," I whispered. "Yes, please." Elijah smiled, and it was the brightest thing in the room. He handed me a heavy fountain pen. "Then sign here, daughter." My hand shook as I signed my name. Sophia King. It was the last time I would sign that name with the heavy burden of its history. 2 weeks later, we stood in a closed courtroom in downtown Chicago. It was a private hearing, just us, Marcus, and the judge, who happened to be an old colleague of Elijah's. There was no fanfare, no audience, but the air was thick with solemnity. The judge reviewed the petition, asked me if I consented of my own free will, and asked Elijah and Claire if they understood the responsibilities they were undertaking. When the gavel banged, the sound echoed like a gunshot, killing my past. The judge smiled. "Congratulations. The petition is granted. You are now legally the daughter of Elijah and Claire Washington." Claire hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Marcus kissed my temple, whispering that he was proud of me. Elijah shook my hand, then pulled me into a bear hug that smelled of tobacco and safety. There was one final detail to handle. We walked out of the courtroom and sat on a bench in the hallway. "Now about the name," Elijah said. "Legally, you are Sophia Washington now. Your birth certificate will be reissued. However, we have a strategic decision to make." He looked at Marcus, then at me. "If you change your name publicly right now, word might get back to the Kings. They might see it on a business filing or a social media update. If they know they have been legally cut off, they might try to cause trouble before the wedding. They might try to harass you or smear your reputation while they still think they have a connection." I nodded, understanding his logic. He was playing chess while they were playing checkers. "So I keep King," I said. "For now," Elijah agreed. "Keep King as your professional name. Keep it on your office door. Let them believe the status quo remains. Let them think you are just sulking. When the time is right, specifically at the wedding, we will reveal the truth. Until then, let this be our secret." I touched the new driver's license application in my pocket. It was a secret that felt like a superpower. To the world, I was still Sophia King, the scapegoat, the gardener, the outsider. But in the eyes of the law, and in the truth of my heart, I was Sophia Washington, heir to a legacy of love and dignity. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright Chicago sunlight, and the city looked different. The buildings looked taller, the sky bluer. I was no longer a tethered boat drifting in a storm. I was anchored. And God help the Kings if they tried to crash into me now, because they had no idea that the vessel they used to torment was now an ironclad warship. Time moves differently when you are happy. The year following my adoption felt like a blur of triumphs. I took Elijah's advice and bought the building that housed my firm, turning me from a tenant into a landlord. My business expanded into 3 new states, and my relationship with Marcus deepened into the kind of partnership I had only ever read about in books. He did not just love me, he saw me. He respected my ambition, and he sheltered my heart. It was on a crisp October evening, on the rooftop terrace of the very building I had purchased, that Marcus got down on one knee. The Chicago skyline was glittering behind him, a sea of diamonds against the velvet night. But the only diamond that mattered was the 5-carat radiant cut stone he held in his hand. He didn't ask me to complete him. He asked me to build with him. When I said yes, and he slipped that ring onto my finger, I felt the final weight of my past dissolve. Because Marcus was a public figure in the tech world, our engagement was not a quiet affair. It made the pages of Crane's Chicago Business and was featured on several high-profile social media accounts celebrating Black excellence. The headline read, "Tech Mogul to Wed Landscape Architect Power Couple of the Year." The photo showed us looking radiant, my hand resting on his chest, the massive ring catching the light. I knew as soon as the article went live that the silence from the King family would end. Narcissists do not care about your pain, but they care deeply about your success. They cannot stand to see the person they discarded shining without them. They view your achievements as assets they failed to liquidate. 3 days after the engagement announcement, my personal cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I usually let those go to voicemail, but I was expecting a call from a vendor in Italy about marble for a project, so I answered. "Hello, this is Sophia." There was a pause. A heavy, wet sniffle echoed through the line. Sophia. Baby girl. Is that you? My stomach dropped. The voice was unmistakable. It was Brenda. My biological mother. I had blocked her number a year ago, so she must have bought a burner phone or borrowed one just to bypass my boundaries. I sat up straighter in my office chair, my hand instinctively going to the adoption decree I kept in my locked drawer. What do you want, Brenda? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. Oh, do not be so cold, she wailed. I have been calling and calling. I have been so worried about you. We all have. We miss you so much, Sophia. How can you punish your family like this? How can you cut us off? I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. You missed me, I repeated. You did not miss me when I was lying in a hospital bed with sepsis. You did not miss me when you were drinking margaritas in the Bahamas while I was being wheeled into surgery. You did not call once in 12 months. That was a misunderstanding, she said quickly, her tone shifting from sorrow to dismissal. We thought you were exaggerating. You know you used to be dramatic as a child. We apologized for that in our hearts. Why do you hold on to the past? God tells us to forgive. I am not holding on to the past, I said. I am protecting my future. Sophia, please. She cut me off. I saw the news. I saw the ring. There it was. The truth. It took less than 2 minutes for her to pivot from, I miss you, to I saw the ring. It is beautiful. She continued, her voice taking on a hungry, greedy quality. 5 carats. That man must be worth a fortune. I always knew you would do well for yourself. I always told your father that Sophia is the special one. My grip on the phone tightened. She had never said that. She had called me the difficult one, the stubborn one, the expensive one. I am hanging up now, I said. Wait, she screamed. Wait. Sophia, listen. You are getting married. A mother dreams of her daughter's wedding day her whole life. You cannot do this without us. People will talk. They will ask where your parents are. Do you want to embarrass your new fiancé? Do you want his rich friends to think you come from broken trash? I paused. She had played the only card she had left. Shame. She knew that in our community appearances were everything. She was betting that I would be too afraid of a scandal to exclude them. She was betting that I would pay the ransom of their presence just to keep up the facade of a perfect family. You have to let your father walk you down the aisle. Brenda pressed, sensing my hesitation. It is tradition. And Jasmine wants to be your matron of honor. She forgives you for blocking her. She wants to help you plan. We can be a family again, Sophia. Just unlock us. Let us come home. I looked out the window at the city below. I thought about Elijah's advice from the courthouse. Let them believe the status quo remains. If I told her to go to hell right now, she would likely go to the press. She would sell a story about the heartless gold digger daughter who abandoned her poor sick parents. She would crash the wedding. She would cause a scene from the outside that I could not control. But if I invited them, if I brought them inside, I could control exactly where they stood. I could control the narrative. I realized then that the woman I was a year ago would have caved out of guilt, but the woman I was today was making a strategic calculation. I was not opening the door to let them back into my heart. I was opening the door to lead them into a trap. I needed them at that wedding not to honor them, but to witness the final transition of power. Fine, I said slowly, making my voice sound weary, as if I was finally surrendering. Oh, thank you, Jesus, Brenda cried. I knew you still loved us. I will unblock your numbers, I said. You can come to the wedding, but I am handling the planning. You just show up as guests. Of course. Of course, she agreed too quickly. But we need to meet Marcus. We need to discuss the dowry, I mean the arrangements, and the dress. I need to find something that matches the mother of the bride theme. We will talk later, I said, cutting her off. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time staring at the diamond on my finger. It sparkled with a fierce, cold light. I picked up my cell phone and went to the settings. I found the blocked list. I scrolled down to Mom, Dad, Jasmine, Kyle. One by one, I hit unblock. It felt like unlocking the cages of wild animals, but this time I was the zookeeper. I knew exactly what they were. I knew exactly what they wanted. And I knew exactly what they were going to get. They thought they were being invited to a royal wedding to claim their spot on the throne. They had no idea they were walking into their own trial. I picked up the landline on my desk and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Hey, Dad," I said when Elijah answered. "Hey, sweetheart." Elijah's voice was warm. "Everything okay?" "I just got off the phone with Brenda," I said. Silence on the other end. Then a knowing hum. "The article. The article." I confirmed. "She wants back in. She wants Dad to walk me down the aisle." "What did you tell her?" Elijah asked. I told her yes. Elijah let out a low chuckle. It was a sound of approval. The Trojan horse strategy. "Exactly," I said. "They are coming to the wedding." "Good," Elijah said. "Let them come. Let them buy their expensive outfits. Let them brag to their friends. It will make the fall that much harder." I hung up the phone and a cold smile touched my lips. The trap was set. My biological family was coming to my wedding to eat, drink, and take credit for a woman they had tried to destroy. But they were forgetting one crucial detail. The bride was not Sophia King, the victim. The bride was Sophia Washington, the survivor. And she was about to serve a dish of revenge that had been marinating for 32 years. The elevator doors to the penthouse slid open with a soft chime, revealing the foyer that was larger than the entire living room of the house I grew up in. I stood there waiting to greet them, my hands clasped behind my back, not in submission, but in the posture of a general surveying the enemy. My biological family stepped out, and for a split second, the masks slipped. I saw the raw, unadulterated shock on my mother's face as she took in the 20-foot ceilings and the panoramic view of Lake Michigan. I saw my father's jaw go slack as he looked at the original artwork hanging on the walls. But it was Kyle who reacted first. He recovered from his awe instantly and replaced it with a sneer of performative criticism, because men like Kyle can never admit they are impressed by a woman they deem inferior. Kyle walked past me without a hello, his heavy boots thudding against the imported Italian marble floors. He wandered into the main living area holding a can of soda he had brought with him. He looked at the minimalist furniture, the clean lines, and the neutral palette that Marcus and I had curated with a top designer. "It is a bit sterile in here, isn't it?" Kyle said loud enough for everyone to hear. He ran a hand over a velvet armchair that cost more than his car. "It feels like a hotel lobby. No soul. If this were my place, I would have put some gold accents in. Maybe some marble statues. You know, real class." I watched him place his sweating soda can directly onto a walnut coffee table, ignoring the coaster sitting 3 inches away. A year ago, I would have rushed to slide the coaster under it, apologizing for having delicate furniture. Today, I just watched the ring of water form on the wood. I did not care about the table. I could buy 1,000 tables. I cared about the evidence of his disrespect. Jasmine walked in behind him, her eyes darting around the room, calculating the value of everything she saw. She did not look at the view. She looked at my jewelry on the console table. She looked at the brand of the candle burning on the mantel. She walked up to me, and instead of hugging me, she reached out and fingered the fabric of my silk blouse. "Nice," she said. "Is this the new season Gucci?" "It is," I said simply. "Must be nice to spend someone else's money," she muttered, turning away to flop onto the sofa. "So where is the fiancé? Where is the man writing the checks? Marcus is in Tokyo on business." I lied smoothly. Marcus was actually in the building in his home office downstairs listening to everything via the security system, but they did not need to know that. My father Otis cleared his throat, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. He looked uncomfortable, but determined the look of a man about to ask for a loan he has no intention of repaying. "Well, since Marcus isn't here, we can talk business," he said, sitting down on the edge of the sofa. "We need to finalize the guest list, Sophia. Your mother and I have been up all night praying on it, and we came up with a list of essential people." He handed me the paper. I unfolded it. It was a handwritten list of nearly 50 names. I scanned them. Uncle Ray, Cousin Vern from Detroit, Deacon Jones. People I had not seen in 10 years. People who had never sent a birthday card. People who had likely forgotten I existed until they heard I was marrying a millionaire. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We really wanted an intimate wedding. I barely know half these people." "That is not the point," Brenda snapped, walking over to inspect my liquor cabinet. "These are people who prayed for you. These are community elders. It reflects badly on us if we do not invite them. Besides, they are generous people. You invite 50 of them, you get 50 envelopes. You do the math." I looked at my father. He wasn't thinking about celebrating my love. He was thinking about the cash gifts. He was treating my wedding like a fundraising gala for his own ego. "Fine," I said, folding the paper. "I will add them to the list. All 50. My mother stopped touching the crystal decanter and turned around, looking suspicious. "Just like that. You are not going to argue." I shrugged. "You are right, Mom. It is about family. Invite whoever you want." Jasmine sat up straighter, sensing that the vault was open. "Well, if we are approving things, I have some requirements too. Since I am the matron of honor, I need to stand out. I do not want to wear some ugly generic bridesmaid dress." I looked at her. I had never actually asked her to be matron of honor. She had just assigned the title to herself the moment she walked in. "What did you have in mind, Jasmine?" I asked. "I found a designer in New York," she said, pulling up a picture on her phone. "It is custom couture, hand-beaded, silk chiffon. It is gorgeous. It cost $10,000, but I figure since you are spending so much on flowers, 10 grand is a drop in the bucket. And obviously you are paying for it because I am doing you the favor of standing up there with you." I looked at the phone. The dress was white. It was a white floor-length beaded gown. It looked exactly like a wedding dress. She wanted to wear a wedding dress to my wedding, and she wanted me to pay $10,000 for the privilege of being upstaged. Most brides would have screamed. Most sisters would have started a war right there in the living room. But I was not a bride today. I was a strategist. "It is beautiful, Jasmine," I said, forcing a smile. "It will look stunning on you. So, you will pay for it?" She asked, her eyes gleaming with greed. "Send me the invoice," I said. "I will wire the money directly to the designer tomorrow." Kyle laughed, kicking his feet up onto the coffee table. "See, I told you she would cave. She knows she owes us. After all the years we put up with her moody behavior, paying for a dress is the least she can do." My mother walked over and patted my cheek. Her hand felt cold. "I am glad to see you are finally growing up, Sophia. I am glad you are finally realizing that money means nothing if you do not share it with your blood. We are going to make this wedding spectacular. Your father has already written his speech. It is going to be the highlight of the night." I felt a chill go down my spine at the thought of Otis holding a microphone, but I nodded. "I cannot wait to hear it," I said. They stayed for another hour, drinking my expensive scotch, eating the appetizers I had ordered, and criticizing everything from the thread count of the curtains to the view of the lake. When they finally left, heading down the elevator with their guest list approved and their $10,000 dress secured, they looked triumphant. They looked like conquerors leaving a city they had just sacked. I waited until the elevator doors closed. I waited until the digital numbers showed they had reached the lobby. Then I walked over to the coffee table. I picked up the sweating soda can Kyle had left behind. I used a napkin to wipe the water ring off the wood. Then I walked to the intercom on the wall and pressed the button for the downstairs office. Did you get all that? I asked. Marcus's voice came through clear and calm, but with an edge of steel I rarely heard. Every word, he said. The guest list. The dress. The speech. I have the recording saved. Good. I said, looking at the empty room that suddenly felt cleaner now that they were gone. Are you okay? Marcus asked. I looked at the spot where Jasmine had sat demanding a white dress to outshine me. I looked at the spot where my father had handed me a list of strangers to exploit for cash. I am better than okay, I said, my voice steady. They just gave us everything we need. They think they are coming to a coronation, Marcus. They have no idea, they just RSVP'd to their own execution. I turned off the lights in the living room, leaving the penthouse, bathed in the glow of the city. I was down $10,000 for a dress I would let her wear, and I was hosting 50 strangers I did not know. But it was a small price to pay. I was investing in the perfect stage for the final act. And when the curtain fell, they would be the ones left in the dark. The rehearsal dinner was held in the private cellar of a Michelin star restaurant downtown. The walls were lined with vintage wines worth more than the car I drove in college, and the lighting was dim and romantic. It was the kind of setting designed for intimacy and genuine connection, but with the King family present, it felt more like a stage set for a tragedy. My biological parents were seated at the head of the table, acting as if they were the ones footing the bill. My mother Brenda was loudly critiquing the sommelier's choice of Pinot Noir, claiming it was too earthy, while my father Otis was busy stuffing breadsticks into his jacket pocket when he thought no one was looking. Jasmine sat to my left wearing a white cocktail dress that was aggressively bridal. She spent the entire first course talking about how she would have planned things differently if she were the one getting married to a billionaire. I sat there sipping my water, watching them perform. I was calm. It was the calm of a sniper waiting for the wind to settle. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table, his thumb rubbing circles on my palm. He knew what this cost me. He knew that every smile I faked was a withdrawal from my emotional bank account. But he also knew the plan. We just had to get through tonight. Halfway through the main course, the tension in my shoulders became too much. I needed a moment of silence. I needed to escape the sound of Kyle bragging about a business deal that I knew for a fact didn't exist. I excused myself and headed toward the restrooms located down a long, quiet corridor lined with velvet wallpaper. The ladies' room was empty. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection. You can do this, Sophia, I told myself. Just 24 more hours. Then it is over. Then they are gone. I dried my hands and opened the door to leave. But I stopped dead in my tracks. Voices were drifting from the alcove just around the corner. It was a secluded spot near the emergency exit, far enough from the dining room that no one could hear. But the acoustics of the cellar carried sound perfectly. I heard the distinct click of a lighter followed by a heavy exhale. You have to calm down, Kyle. It was Jasmine's voice. She sounded irritated, not worried. You are sweating like a pig out there. People are going to notice. I cannot calm down, Jasmine. Kyle's voice was a harsh whisper edged with panic. I checked my accounts this morning. The interest is compounding. The investors are threatening to seize the house. They are going to seize the cars. If I do not come up with a liquidity injection by Monday morning, I am finished. Do you understand? $2 million. I am $2 million in the hole. I stood frozen behind the door, my hand hovering over the handle. $2 million. Kyle had been parading around town acting like a real estate mogul, but the truth was he was drowning. We have been over this, Jasmine hissed. We have a plan. The plan relies on Sophia being an idiot, Kyle snapped. What if she says no? What if Marcus looks at the papers? He won't look at the papers, Jasmine said dismissively. Listen to me. Tomorrow is the wedding. Emotions will be high. Dad is going to give that tearjerker speech about family, helping family. Mom is going to cry. Then right before the reception, while she is all emotional, we corner her. We tell her it is a temporary bridge loan for your company, just a signature to show familial support, so the bank backs off. We tell her if she does not sign, you will go to jail, and it will ruin her big day. She will sign. Jasmine continued, her voice dripping with malice. She is weak, Kyle. She has always been weak. She spent her whole life begging for our approval. She paid 5 grand for a golf cart just because Dad yelled at her. She will sign a guarantee for 2 million if she thinks it will keep us happy. She is so desperate to be one of us she would sign her soul away. I felt a coldness spread through my veins that was absolute zero. They were not here to celebrate me. They were not here to reconcile. They were here to harvest me. They viewed me as a livestock animal to be slaughtered to cover their mistakes. Jasmine did not love me. She thought I was pathetic. She was counting on my trauma to manipulate me into financial ruin. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I opened the voice memo app and pressed the big red button. I held the phone up toward the crack in the door. But what if she reads it? Kyle asked, his voice shaking. She won't read it. Jasmine laughed softly. I will make sure she has had plenty of champagne, and Mom will be there guilt-tripping her. We just need her signature as the guarantor. Once she signs, the debt is hers. Marcus will have to pay it off to avoid the scandal. It is perfect. We get the money, they get to keep their reputation. It is a win-win. A win-win. She called destroying my life a win. I recorded for another 10 seconds, capturing Kyle's relieved sigh and Jasmine's reassurance that I was too stupid to notice the fine print. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. I uploaded it to the cloud. I sent a copy to Marcus. I looked at myself in the mirror of the hallway. The woman staring back at me was not the weak, desperate girl Jasmine described. That girl had died in a hospital bed 2 years ago. The woman in the mirror was a shark. I put the phone back in my purse. I smoothed my dress. I put a smile on my face that was dazzling and dangerous. I walked out of the restroom and turned the corner. Jasmine and Kyle jumped apart, looking like guilty teenagers. Kyle hid his cigarette behind his back. "Oh, there you guys are," I said, my voice bright and cheery. I was wondering where the life of the party went. Jasmine blinked, looking me up and down, searching for suspicion. But I gave her nothing. I gave her the performance of a lifetime. "We were just getting some fresh air," Jasmine lied, smoothing her hair. "Are you okay, Sophia? You look intense." "I am better than okay," I said, stepping closer to them. "I was just thinking about tomorrow. It is going to be such a memorable day. Everything is going to change. I can feel it." Kyle laughed nervously, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, big changes. To family." I looked him dead in the eye. "To family. And to getting exactly what we deserve." I turned and walked back toward the dining room, my heels clicking on the stone floor. I could feel them staring at my back, thinking they had me trapped. They thought they were the hunters leading a lamb to the slaughter. They had no idea that the lamb was armed and the slaughterhouse belonged to her. I sat back down next to Marcus. He looked at me, sensing the shift in my energy. He checked his phone, seeing the audio file I had just sent. He looked up at me, his eyes dark with protective fury. I put a hand on his arm. "Not yet," I whispered. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to relax. He poured me a glass of wine. "To tomorrow," he said softly. "To the truth," I replied, clinking my glass against his. I looked across the table at my parents, who were arguing over the dessert menu. I looked at Jasmine and Kyle, who were walking back in, looking smug and secretive. I took a sip of the expensive wine. It tasted sweet. Let them have their plan. Let them have their rehearsal. Tomorrow I was going to burn their entire world down, and I was going to do it with a smile on my face and a microphone in my hand. The debt was coming due, but it wasn't the $2 million Kyle owed the bank. It was the lifetime of pain they owed me, and I was going to collect every single cent. The morning of my wedding was the first time in history that a bride felt calmer than her guests. While most women are pacing the floor worrying about rain or a missing florist truck, I was sitting in the bridal suite sipping tea and watching the clouds drift over Lake Michigan. The venue was a glass-encased chapel on the water, a structure that looked like a diamond floating on the lake. It was elegant, modern, and expensive, everything my biological family craved to be associated with. I knew from my wedding planner that the King family had arrived an hour early. They had marched in like they owned the place, demanding access to the VIP holding area, only to be politely directed to the general guest waiting room. My mother, Brenda, had apparently tried to give the photographer a shot list of poses she wanted with me, But the photographer, who had strict instructions from Marcus, pretended to have a language barrier and walked away. They were already agitated. They were already feeling the walls of control closing in, but they had no idea that the ceiling was about to collapse. At 4 o'clock sharp, the string quartet began to play. The guests were seated. The sunlight was streaming through the glass walls, turning the room into a kaleidoscope of gold and white. I stood behind the massive double doors of the chapel, my heart beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. Beside me stood Elijah Washington. He looked magnificent in a bespoke tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He exuded a quiet power, a gravitational pull of dignity that made everyone around him stand a little straighter. He looked down at me, his eyes crinkling with pride. "Are you ready, daughter?" he asked, offering me his arm. I looked at his arm. It was not just an arm. It was a pillar. It was the support I had prayed for when I was a child hiding in my bedroom. "I am ready, Dad," I said. On the other side of those doors, the drama was unfolding exactly as I had scripted it. My biological father, Otis, was standing at the entrance to the aisle. He was wearing a tuxedo he had rented from a chain store. The sleeves were slightly too long, and the fabric had that synthetic shine under the lights. He was puffing out his chest, adjusting his bow tie, waiting for the signal to come and collect me. He had practiced this moment in his head 1,000 times. The moment he would walk the wealthy, successful daughter down the aisle and accept the admiration of the crowd as the patriarch who made it all possible. My wedding planner, a woman named Sarah, who was as tough as nails, approached him. She held a clipboard against her chest and signaled for the ushers to stand ready. "Mr. King," she whispered, "you need to take your seat now. The ceremony is beginning." Otis looked at her confused. He laughed, a nervous, dismissive sound. "I think you are confused, sweetheart. I am the father of the bride. I am waiting for Sophia. I am walking her down." Sarah did not smile. She did not waver. "I am afraid that is not in the program, sir. The bride has made other arrangements. Please take your seat in the third row. We need to clear the aisle." Otis's face turned a shade of plum purple. "Third row? What do you mean, third row? I am her father. I am not sitting in the audience like a common guest. I am the host of this event." "Actually, sir," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a steely whisper, "you are a guest. And if you do not sit down immediately, security will escort you to the exit. We are on a tight schedule." Otis looked around. People were staring. The photographer was capturing his humiliation. He looked at the security guard who had stepped out from the shadows, a large man with crossed arms. Otis realized he had no leverage. Gritting his teeth, he muttered a curse word and stomped to the third row, squeezing in beside Brenda, who looked equally confused and furious. "Why are you sitting here?" Brenda hissed loud enough for the people in the second row to hear. "You should be back there with her. She has a planner handling the train." Otis lied, straightening his jacket to save face. "I will join her at the altar. It is a modern thing." Just then the music changed. The soft classical strings swelled into a majestic, powerful orchestral piece. The heavy oak doors swung open. The entire congregation stood up. Every head turned. I stepped into the light. I was wearing a dress that was structured and architectural, a nod to my career. It was simple but breathtaking. But nobody was looking at the dress. Every single pair of eyes in that room was fixed on the man whose arm I was holding. I was not walking alone, and I was certainly not walking with Otis King. I was walking with the Honorable Elijah Washington, former Supreme Court Justice of the state. A ripple of sound went through the room. It started as a gasp and turned into a wave of whispers. Everyone knew Elijah. In Chicago, he was royalty. He was a man of unimpeachable character and immense influence. Seeing him walk me down the aisle was a statement that needed no translation. I looked toward the third row. I saw the moment the realization hit them. Brenda stood up. She actually stood up in the middle of the ceremony, her mouth dropping open in a perfect O of horror. She clutched her purse to her chest, as if she was having a heart attack. "What the hell is this?" she screeched. It wasn't loud enough to stop the music, but it was loud enough for the microphone near the altar to pick up a faint distortion. Her friends, the 50 random church members they had invited, turned to look at her with pity. They saw the truth instantly. The daughter she had bragged about was clinging to another father. The narrative Brenda had spun for years, that they were a close, loving family, unraveled in seconds. But the reaction I savored the most was Kyle's. Kyle was sitting next to Jasmine, who was fuming in her white dress, realizing she looked ridiculous next to my elegance. Kyle was not looking at me. He was staring at Elijah with the blood draining from his face. He looked like he had seen a ghost. I knew exactly what he was thinking. 2 years ago, Kyle had been sued by a contractor for non-payment. The case had gone to the appellate court. He had tried to pull strings, he had tried to bribe a clerk, and he had been shut down hard by the presiding judge's office. That presiding judge was Elijah Washington. Kyle knew Elijah's reputation. He knew that Elijah destroyed fraudsters for breakfast. And now he was watching the man he feared most in the legal world, walking his sister-in-law down the aisle. I saw Kyle lean over to Jasmine, his lips moving frantically. "That is Judge Washington. That is the judge. We are dead. Jasmine, we are dead." Jasmine shoved him away, her eyes locked on me with pure hatred. She didn't care about the judge. She cared that I had replaced Otis. She cared that I had stolen the moment she thought belonged to her father. I walked past them. I moved slowly, deliberately. I did not look down. I looked straight ahead at Marcus, who was waiting for me at the altar with tears in his eyes. But as I passed the third row, I allowed myself a split-second glance. I locked eyes with Otis. He was slumped in his chair, defeated, small, a man in a cheap rental suit watching a king take his place. He looked at Elijah, and then he looked at me, and for the first time I saw it sink in. He realized that money could not buy the kind of loyalty I was displaying. He realized he had lost me not today, but years ago, when he chose a golf cart over my trust. I reached the end of the aisle. Elijah stopped. He took my hand and kissed it gently. Then he turned to Marcus. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the officiant asked. Elijah's voice boomed through the chapel, deep and resonant. "Her mother Claire and I do," he said. "Her mother Claire." From the front row, Claire turned and smiled at me, radiant in blue. In the third row, Brenda let out a sound that was half sob, half choke. She collapsed back into her seat, burying her face in her hands. The humiliation was total. I had erased her. I had erased Otis. In front of the wealthy elite, in front of the press, in front of their own friends, I had publicly declared that they were not my parents. I stepped up to Marcus. He took my hand, his grip firm and warm. "You okay?" he whispered. I looked back one last time at the third row, where my biological family sat in the ruins of their ego. "I have never been better," I whispered back. The ceremony began. Words of love and commitment washed over us. But the real vow had already been made. I had vowed to honor myself. And as I stood there, I knew the reception was going to be the final nail in the coffin. They were already bleeding, but I was about to deliver the fatal blow. The microphone was waiting, and so was the truth. The reception hall was a masterpiece of crystal and light, but the atmosphere in the corner where the King family sat was dark and heavy with impending chaos. My biological father, Otis, had consumed 3 glasses of scotch in rapid succession and was now loudly tapping a spoon against his glass, trying to command the attention of the room. He was red-faced and sweating, eager to deliver the speech he believed would cement his status as the patriarch of this wealthy gathering. Beside him, Brenda was clutching my arm every time I walked past, whispering aggressively that I needed to introduce her to the senator sitting at table 4. Jasmine, in her white gown, was taking selfies in front of my floral wall, acting as if she were the bride, while Kyle was pacing nervously by the bar, checking his phone every 30 seconds, waiting for the loan confirmation he thought was coming. I looked at Marcus. He nodded imperceptibly. It was time. I walked to the center of the stage and signaled the audio-visual team. The music faded. The room went silent. Otis stood up looking triumphant, thinking I was yielding the floor to him. He buttoned his cheap jacket and started to walk toward the stairs. But I spoke first. My voice rang out clear and steady over the speakers. Thank you all for coming tonight. Before we cut the cake, I have a very special presentation. I want to address some confusion regarding the guests of honor. Otis froze halfway up the stairs. He smiled, waving to the crowd, thinking I was about to praise him. I continued, my eyes locking onto his. There has been a lot of talk about family tonight, about sacrifice, about who deserves credit for the woman I have become. And I think it is time we set the record straight with documentation. Because as a wise judge once told me, evidence is more important than testimony. I gestured to the massive 500-inch LED screen behind me. The slide changed. It was not a montage of childhood photos. It was a high-resolution scan of a legal document. The words, "Decree of Adoption," were magnified in bold black letters. Below that were the signatures for Elijah Washington, Claire Washington, and Sophia Washington. The date was stamped clearly from over a year ago. A gasp rippled through the room. The senator at table 4 put on his glasses. The reporters in the back started snapping photos furiously. Otis stared at the screen. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. Brenda let out a strangled squeak, clutching her pearls. I gripped the microphone. I want to thank Mr. Otis King and Mrs. Brenda King for attending tonight. I invited you here not as parents but as guests, because that is what you are. Guests. Strangers who share my biology, but none of my values. I took a step forward, looking down at them from the stage. For 32 years I begged for a seat at your table. I paid for your repairs. I bought your gifts. I let you humiliate me. But the moment I stopped paying, the moment I needed you to be parents, you abandoned me in a hospital bed to die. You made your choice in the Bahamas, and I made mine in a courtroom. I pointed to the screen. I am the legal daughter of the Washington family. That means legally and financially I have no tie to the King family. Which brings me to the matter of the $2 million debt that my former brother-in-law Kyle is currently trying to hide. Kyle dropped his drink. The glass shattered on the dance floor. The sound was sharp and violent. I looked at Jasmine, who had turned pale beneath her heavy makeup. I heard your conversation in the wine cellar last night, Jasmine. I know you planned to corner me tonight. I know you planned to guilt-trip me into signing a guarantee for Kyle's failing business. You thought I was weak. You thought I was stupid. You thought you could use my wedding day to save yourselves from bankruptcy. I shook my head slowly. I am not your guarantor. I am not your safety net. And I am certainly not your fool. The Washington family does not bail out frauds. Marcus stepped up beside me, taking the microphone. His presence was imposing, radiating a protective fury that terrified Kyle. Marcus looked straight at Kyle, who was now trembling visibly. And Kyle Marcus said, his voice deep and calm. Regarding that loan application you submitted to my bank earlier this week, the one where you listed Sophia as a silent partner to boost your credit rating, that application has been flagged. It has been rejected permanently. And because falsifying information on a loan application is a federal crime, our legal department has already forwarded the file to the authorities. I suggest you leave now before the police arrive to take a statement. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a guillotine falls. Otis looked at the screen, then at Elijah, who was standing at his table looking every bit the Supreme Court justice he was. Otis realized he had no power here. He had no speech. He had no daughter. Brenda burst into loud theatrical tears, trying one last time to play the victim. How could you? After all we did for you, you ungrateful child. Security, I said, cutting her off. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. King and their guests out of the building. They are disrupting my reception. 4 large security guards materialized from the shadows. They did not touch them roughly, but they were firm. They blocked Otis's path to the stage. They guided a sobbing Brenda toward the exit. Kyle did not wait to be escorted. He grabbed Jasmine's hand and practically ran toward the door, terrified of the police. Jasmine tripped on the hem of her ridiculous white dress, tearing the expensive fabric, but she scrambled up and followed him, her face hidden in shame. I watched them go. I watched the people who had terrorized my self-esteem for decades disappear through the double doors. And as the doors swung shut, cutting them off from my life forever, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The room erupted into applause. It started with Elijah and Claire, and soon the entire room was cheering. They were not cheering for the drama. They were cheering for justice. I looked at Marcus. He kissed my forehead. "It is done," he whispered. I walked over to the head table where a bottle of wine was waiting. It was a vintage Cabernet, the exact same vintage my mother had forced me to put in the mail 2 years ago. The bottle she had valued more than my presence. I picked up the bottle. I poured a glass. The deep red liquid swirled, catching the light. I walked over to Elijah and Claire. I handed a glass to my father and a glass to my mother. "To family," I said, raising my glass. "The one we build. To family," Elijah said, clinking his glass against mine. I took a sip. It was the best wine I had ever tasted. It tasted like victory. It tasted like peace. I looked out at the skyline of Chicago, the city where I had built my empire, the city where I had found my true parents, and the city where I had finally learned that my worth was not negotiable. My story didn't end with a lonely drive on a highway. It ended here, surrounded by love, holding the hand of a man who worshipped me and wearing the name of a family that chose me. The Kings were gone, the Washingtons were here, and Sophia, the real Sophia. She was finally home. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save your own soul, let me know in the comments below. It is the hardest thing you will ever do, but I promise you, on the other side of that, pain is a freedom you cannot imagine. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Because sometimes the only way to find your happy ending is to write the villains out of the script entirely. Thank you for watching. The most profound lesson from my journey is that family is defined by behavior, not biology. For years, I believed my worth was tied to my utility, thinking I had to buy love with obedience and money. But the moment I stopped begging for a seat at a table where I wasn't respected, I found the strength to build my own. Walking away from toxicity isn't cruelty. It is survival. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. Sometimes the only way to find your true home is to have the courage to leave the one you were born into. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to join a community that believes in choosing yourself first.